The ambush and the unveiling of the trap. The gavel's strike, a sharp, metallic snap, signaled the start of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. What was scheduled as a mundane, procedural review on FBI transparency instantly metamorphosed into a high-stakes duel. The air in the room was not merely tense, it was thick with the scent of political animosity that had fermented over years of headlines and cable news battles. At the epicenter sat Adam Schiff, his posture betraying a taut anxiety beneath his suit jacket. Facing the apparent picture of Southern composure, Senator John Kennedy, whose glasses sat low on his nose, suggesting an amused detachment. Schiff, the master of the prosecutorial narrative, struck first, attempting to seize the moral high ground and dismiss his opponent. "Senator Kennedy," he began, his voice controlled but edged with contempt, "you've made a career out of defending ignorance." The room stilled. Reporters, sensing the imminent confrontation, looked up. Schiff pressed the attack. "Your constant insinuations about the FBI's integrity aren't oversight. They're sabotage. You're undermining our institutions because you don't understand them." The words were calculated to inflict maximum political damage, labeling Kennedy as a partisan destroyer of faith in the system. Kennedy's reaction was the first signal that the script had been rewritten. Instead of shouting, he reached for a pitcher, poured a slow stream of water, and took a measured, deliberate sip. This calculated patience was the first cut. "I appreciate the lecture," Kennedy finally drawled, his voice soft, compelling the room to lean forward. "But back home we call that talking loud while saying nothing." A ripple of uneasy laughter underscored the shift in momentum. Schiff, enraged by the dismissal, rose, palms flat on the table, attempting to re-establish dominance. "Spare us the folksy charm. Senator, you've turned oversight into conspiracy theater. You've accused federal agents of political bias with zero proof." He had uttered the fateful phrase, "zero proof." Kennedy's smile vanished, replaced by a gaze of piercing gravity. "Zero proof, huh? You sure you want to use that phrase in this room, Mr. Schiff?" The click of cameras intensified. Schiff, fueled by partisan arrogance, leaned into the counterattack, dismissing Kennedy as a product of Louisiana politics that had forgotten facts. The insult crossed a critical, personal line. Kennedy, now leaning forward, elbows resting on the table, met Schiff's gaze, his voice steady as polished oak. "You ever notice, Mr. Schiff? The folks who talk most about facts are usually the ones running from them." Then came the true ambush. Kennedy reached for a slim, inconspicuous folder. Its tab read, "Crossfire Files." Schiff's eyes flicked it, a single, involuntary movement caught by every camera, a moment of pure dread. Kennedy did not open it. He simply let the silence stretch, the Crossfire Files sitting between them like an unexploded ordnance. "Before we get to that," he added quietly, allowing the southern drawl to return, "you might want to take a deep breath. This next part's going to sting." The confrontation had ceased to be a debate, it was now a public reckoning. And the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee was trapped within the glare of his own history. The Durham dictate and the collapse of proof. The air was now so thick that the hum of the air conditioning felt like a roar, the silence amplifying the pressure cooker atmosphere. John Kennedy maintained his surgical patience, letting the Crossfire Files folder sit between them like a judge's final decree. Adam Schiff, trying desperately to return to his narrative of victimhood, snapped, "If this is another one of your circus acts, Senator, I suggest you save it for your next campaign rally." Kennedy's response was a soft but lethal preemption. "You might want to hold that thought, Mr. Schiff, because this here," he tapped the folder lightly, "ain't campaign material. It's your own words." The phrase caught Schiff mid-motion, the flicker of panic visible. Kennedy then deliberately opened the folder, extracting a single, tabbed, and highlighted sheet of paper. He didn't look up, forcing Schiff to endure the suspense. "You told the American people for 3 years you had proof of Russian collusion. More than circumstantial evidence, I believe, were your exact words." He finally looked up. "I wrote that down myself the first time you said it on national television." Schiff, attempting to cling to his former authority, insisted, "I stand by my work as intelligence chair. We acted on credible intelligence." Kennedy nodded slowly, his voice laced with devastating irony. Credible, he repeated, then turned the page toward the camera, revealing the bold heading, Durham Report Findings. No predicate for investigation. The sound of a collective, national realization seemed to sweep the room. I read that report front to back, Kennedy continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that commanded absolute attention. And funny thing, not one mention of that evidence you were so sure of. Not in the FBI's files. Not in Mueller's. Not in Durham's. So I'll ask what millions of Americans been asking for years. Where is it? Schiff was visibly struggling, color rising in his face. That's classified material, Senator. I can't discuss specifics in an open session. It was the familiar refuge of the cornered Washingtonian. Kennedy pressed the advantage, the question a razor edge. Can't discuss it or it never existed? A few quiet gasps broke the stillness. Schiff's hands, shuffling through his papers in a panicked, futile search, were visibly shaking, a moment of unmasking that every camera captured. He tried to pivot to outrage. Your insinuations are reckless. You're taking complex intelligence matters and twisting them for political spectacle. Spectacle, son? Kennedy asked, his faint smile returning. You started that when you called me a hillbilly on national TV. The ripple of laughter confirmed that Schiff had lost the room, the audience, and the moral authority. Kennedy tapped the folder. The small sound amplified into a powerful indictment. The only thing burning here, Mr. Schiff, is your credibility. As Schiff pushed back his chair in a desperate attempt to regain control, the chairman's gavel struck, commanding silence. Kennedy, undisturbed, delivered the coup de grace on the initial point. We're all entitled to opinion, Senator, but we're not entitled to our own facts. And the facts say your entire case against President Trump was built on sand. He then pulled the ultimate irony, a transcript of the Igor Danchenko interview. Reading the key phrase aloud. Some of the information may have been bar talk and hearsay. Bar talk, Kennedy stated, looking directly into the camera. And you still went on television and told the country it was proof of collusion. Schiff's final, weak defense, that interview was classified. You have no right, was immediately neutralized. Was classified, Kennedy interrupted, until it was declassified last year. Turns out the truth's got a habit of finding daylight. Closing the folder softly, Kennedy delivered the final judgment on this chapter. Ignorance is believing your own lies long after the truth's been printed. The montage of deceit and the censures echo. The lights suddenly dimmed, a theatrical flourish entirely controlled by John Kennedy. A harsh, stark white slide snapped into focus on the wall behind him, the digital equivalent of a public shaming. Adam Schiff, turning to the screen, felt the transition from verbal assault to visual indictment. If this is a stunt, Schiff began. Kennedy cut him off, clicking a small remote. March 20, 2017, he said, his voice a steady, unforgiving rhythm. The screen displayed a video clip of a younger, confident Schiff on Meet the Press. I have seen more than circumstantial evidence of collusion. Click. May 2017. CNN. The case is being built. The evidence is damning. Click. July 2017. MSNBC. Kennedy moved to the side of the screen. The red laser dot of the remote steady on the dates like a surgeon marking an incision. We could spend the day. But let's not waste the committee's time. We'll do a montage. The next 60 seconds were relentless. Auditory assault, a drumbeat of deceit. 37 separate appearances were compressed into one devastating minute. Different shows, different anchors, the same phrases looping endlessly. I've seen the evidence. More than circumstantial, clear proof. The looping sound turned the careful, polished words into hollow accusations, stripping them of their political currency. The faces in the gallery shifted from excitement to profound unease. When the montage ended, the room seemed to gasp for air. Kennedy clicked again. The next slide was the cold, hard rebuttal of history. Mueller report, March 2019, did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. Click. Inspector General Horowitz, December 2019, 17 significant errors and omissions in FISA applications. Click. Durham report, May 2023, no predicated evidence. Investigation should not have been opened. Schiff finally spoke, his voice strained and desperate. seeking refuge in the familiar defense. You're cherry-picking, Senator. You're ripping complex intelligence out of context to smear a colleague. Kennedy faced him, the sheer weight of the repetition making the question an unanswerable indictment. Out of context? He said softly. All 37 times? The number hung in the air like a noose. He then introduced the ultimate political judgment. The screen changed to a single, bold word: censure. The House spoke last summer. Kennedy said quietly, lifting a page bearing the congressional seal. It's not my language I'm about to read. It's theirs. Schiff straightened, the color high in his cheeks. Crying, partisan retribution. Maybe, Kennedy conceded, maybe not. He began to read the formal language of the censure motion. Slow enough for every word to land. Misled the American people. Abused sensitive information. Conduct unbecoming of an elected member of the House of Representatives. Schiff could only weakly protest that Kennedy was prosecuting politics. And prosecuting a pattern, Kennedy retorted, his voice unwavering. What a person says when the cameras are on and what he knows when the doors are closed. The indictment was complete, the pursuit of a political narrative, regardless of the cost to truth or the institution itself. The cost of fiction, FBI Form 302 and the Marine Mother. The atmosphere of procedural indictment instantly darkened. Shifting from a political trial to a moral reckoning, Kennedy set aside the censure language and focused on the undeniable human cost of Schiff's political campaign. He introduced the next segment with a profound visual shift. A woman in a black dress, Maria Gonzalez, sat in the front row of the gallery, her fingers tied on the bench rail. Pinned to her lapel was a small photograph of her son in a Marine uniform. Kennedy brought the conversation back to the center table, introducing a document stamped with the seal of the FBI, a Form 302. A witness interview report. This one, Kennedy said, his voice now lower, more serious, was filed in 2017 by a Democratic staffer from your own committee. A man who served under you for 10 years. Schiff, visibly shaken, quickly resorted to the defense of secrecy. That's classified information. You have no authorization to. It's been declassified, Senator. Kennedy interrupted, a note of cold finality in his voice. Public record now. He placed the document down. According to this sworn statement, you personally approved the release of restricted material to the press, specifically information relating to FISA warrants and intercepts. Schiff cried, that's false, but Kennedy countered with the evidence of official scrutiny. The Bureau didn't think so. They opened a leak inquiry in 2018. Case numbers right here. The rapid typing of the reporters confirmed the gravity of the revelation. Schiff was implicated not just in misleading the public, but in the potentially criminal act of leaking sensitive, classified intelligence. To cement the accusation, Kennedy laid a second sheet on top. Fragments don't usually come with signatures. He said quietly, this one's yours. It was an authorization of disclosure form, bearing Schiff's own signature. The personal denial was now rendered moot by the physical proof. Kennedy leaned back, his voice softened with a dangerous pity. You accused me of ignorance this morning, but see, I don't have to be an expert to read what's right in front of me. He pointed out the inescapable pattern, the press, having received, in classified, details from Schiff's office, published excerpts of a classified FISA application 2 days later. I guess they just guessed right. Then, the final, most devastating turn. The projector screen lit up with a map of the United States dotted with crimson markers. Each dot, Kennedy explained, represented a violent incident, a threat, or a reported assault that investigators linked directly to the misinformation about collusion, misinformation that flowed relentlessly from Schiff's televised statements. The map glowed crimson, transforming abstract politics into tangible violence. Kennedy looked toward the gallery, his gaze settling on Maria Gonzalez, the Marine mother. Families stopped speaking to each other. People lost jobs. A Marine mother in Louisiana, he said, nodding toward her, buried her son only to hear him called a traitor at his own funeral because people believed the president he served was working for Russia. The room went utterly still. Schiff turned, his eyes fixed on the desk, unable to meet the mother's unwavering stare. That's the cost of your interpretation, Senator. Not votes, not polls, people. Schiff offered a final, Weak protest. You're exploiting grief for political theater. No, sir, Kennedy concluded, his voice an absolute whisper of moral authority. I'm reminding you that words have weight. And when a man in your position starts calling fiction intelligence, someone always pays the price. He turned off the screen. The crimson map vanished, but the moral stain remained. The Boston connection, money, banks, and FARA. The intensity of the moral judgment was followed immediately by the cold, hard logic of financial corruption. Kennedy, having dismantled Schiff's credibility on truth and national security, now moved to motive. He slid a thick, red sealed envelope onto the table. We've covered the past, he announced. Now, let's talk about the present. This one has to do with that building in Boston we saw a few minutes ago. He peeled back the red seal, the faint ripping sound echoing through the silenced chamber like an alarm. Boston, Massachusetts, he began. One United Bank headquarters. Nice building, but the real story isn't in the architecture. Schiff's previous composure had evaporated, replaced by genuine wariness. If this is another fishing expedition. Kennedy held up a document with a Treasury Department Financial Crimes Division letterhead. This is a wire transfer summary. 3 payments, 2018 through 2020. Destination account. A consulting group registered in California under your former chief of staff's name. He let the connection hang. Origin of funds. Kennedy continued, his voice precise. One United Bank, Boston. A bank that at the time handled contributions from foreign-linked nonprofits tied to technology lobbying. The implication was clear. A shadowy funding conduit flowing from foreign-linked interests to Schiff's inner circle. Schiff scrambled. This is absurd. Every committee receives donations from advocacy groups. You're twisting. Maybe, Kennedy conceded, turning the page, but those same nonprofits sent identical amounts to a political action committee that bought advertising in your district. A committee run out of your campaign office. The links were tightening. Then came the financial legal indictment. Kennedy traced a line at the bottom of the Treasury report with his fingertip. Transaction flagged for review under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, due to intermediary routing through British Virgin Islands subsidiary. He looked up. That's a lot of miles for campaign money to travel. Senator. Schiff, now desperate, cried, this is character assassination. You're weaponizing innuendo. Maybe, Kennedy said, his voice softening with devastating effect. But innuendo didn't write these reports. The Treasury did. The final, shattering connection was visual. Kennedy produced a grainy security camera still from the Boston Bank lobby. Timestamp 2019. The man's profile, captured entering the bank, was instantly recognizable. Schiff saw it the moment the image hit the table. His breath caught. That's your brother, isn't it? Kennedy asked quietly. A muscle jumped in Schiff's jaw. My family is off limits. Senator. I'm not attacking your family. Kennedy calmly corrected. I'm establishing a timeline. He revealed the surveillance logs. Schiff's brother met with a representative from that same consulting group 3 days before the flagged FARA transfer. He sealed the timeline with an email printout. office@adamschiff.house.gov. With the subject line, follow-up Boston briefing. Context a funny thing, Kennedy concluded, stacking the evidence neatly. It always seems to change once daylight hits it. Tell me, Senator, you ever wonder why truth has such a bad habit of showing up in paperwork? Schiff, defeated, offered no answer. Kennedy had successfully connected the political deceit to a troubling financial trail, raising the specter of corruption that required only one final question: why? The motive revealed: control versus service. The question of motive hung in the air. A single, sharp inquiry left by Kennedy after the devastating exposé of the financial trail. It demanded not an accusation, but a psychological and political explanation for the years of deceit. Why? Kennedy asked, his voice low and devoid of anger. Just the heavy, slow draw of curiosity. You can argue politics all day, but motives tell you who a man really is. He then introduced a new, final folder. House Intelligence Committee. Internal correspondence. What comes next ain't about reports or banks. He said, it's about choices. Kennedy opened the folder, revealing printed email chains stamped with official letterheads. He focused on a March 7, 2018, Email from Schiff's staff director. Schiff attempted to deflect. Every committee coordinates press briefings. That's not unusual. Kennedy seized the precise language of the document. Except this wasn't about briefings. It was about timing. He read the damning text aloud. Ensure release of the unverified dossier excerpts align with scheduled CNN interview. Narrative consistency critical before opposition statement. Where I come from, Kennedy stated, we call that plantin' a story. He then read a second memo. June 2020. Secure leak-friendly outlets before committee vote. Prefer networks with sympathetic framing. That about sound like protecting democracy to you, Senator? Kennedy stacked the emails, squaring the edges. When you told the American people you had proof, you weren't investigating corruption. You were manufacturing belief. That's a dangerous kind of power. The kind that don't need evidence. Just airtime. Schiff, regaining a fraction of his voice, clung to the last refuge of procedure. I reject that completely. Every action my committee took was within procedure. Maybe so, Kennedy replied, his voice gaining its final, mournful authority. But procedure don't wash away intent. The truth is, Senator, you built a story so strong even you started believing it. He delivered the final, devastating analysis of Schiff's career. You said you were protecting democracy. I think you were protecting something else. A reputation, a narrative, maybe even a legacy. He paused, letting the conclusion land with crushing weight. The motive, Senator, it wasn't duty. It was fear. Fear that the system you'd helped build might not survive without you at the center. The room, with its marble columns and polished desks, felt smaller, trapping the defeated politician. Kennedy, having dismantled his opponent's entire narrative and career in hours, turned toward the chairman to enter the communications into the record. He then reached for one more. Final folder, thinner, darker, labeled whistleblower interview. Senator Schiff, he said, his voice quiet but commanding the absolute attention of the chamber. A former staffer from your own committee gave a statement to federal investigators in 2019. It's been verified, and it paints a picture that's a little different from yours. Schiff's head snapped up. That interview was politically motivated. Maybe, Kennedy said, placing his hand on the cover. Or maybe it was just honest. Either way, we're about to find out. He looked directly into the camera. I figure if we've come this far, the American people deserve to hear it straight. The gavel rested idle. The unmasking of the motive was complete. But the exposure of the conspiracy's inner circle was still to come. The unveiling of the whistleblower plot. John Kennedy did not open the final folder immediately. He let the silent anticipation build. The small, thin file, whistleblower interview, carrying the crushing weight of the subsequent impeachment drama. The room held its breath, knowing this was the final, devastating layer of the conspiracy. Senator Schiff, Kennedy began, his voice calm. You tried to characterize this individual's statement as politically motivated. Let's see what motivated it. He flipped open the file, revealing a transcript of sworn testimony before federal investigators. This former staffer, Kennedy stated, who worked closely with your committee on the Russia investigation, told the investigators something crucial. He detailed how the committee, under your direction, actively discouraged agents from following up on exculpatory evidence that would have cleared individuals like Carter Page long before the FISA process was terminated. Schiff, his voice barely a rasp, whispered, that's a lie. It's sworn testimony. Kennedy corrected, but the statement goes deeper. The staffer details a sequence of private meetings in 2018 and 2019. Right after the Mueller report failed to find collusion. Meetings with key figures outside of government, including a high-profile former CIA analyst and a lawyer specializing in opposition research. The topic of these meetings was not national security, Senator. It was the strategy to open a new investigation before the 2020 election. Kennedy placed the key section on the table. It was a single, stark line from the testimony. The goal was not to find facts, but to create pressure. We needed a new vessel. A clean complaint that could not be dismissed as a political attack. The Ukraine call was the opportunity. The sheer audacity of the revelation, that the entire impeachment inquiry was allegedly a manufactured vessel for political pressure, stunned the chamber. Kennedy pointed to a specific section of the testimony. The staffer confirms that your office acted as the central processing unit for the complaint that would eventually be filed by the anonymous whistleblower. Your team not merely received the information, but shaped and refined the language to fit the legal definition of urgent concern necessary to trigger the process. You didn't just meet him, Senator, you packaged his statement for maximum political impact. Schiff finally exploded, half rising from his chair. This is an abuse of process. An attempt to out a protected witness. Protected by whom, Senator? Kennedy asked, his voice rising in righteous anger. By you? The same man who repeatedly leaked classified FISA details for political gain? The man who used his committee to manufacture the narrative of a foreign plot for 3 years? The man who used bar talk to call an American a traitor? He delivered the final, crushing judgment on the conspiracy, connecting the Russia and Ukraine sagas. The motive was fear, Mr. Schiff. Fear that once the truth of the Russia hoax was confirmed by Mueller and Durham, the system you benefited from would collapse. You didn't save democracy. You tried to save your career by launching another political war on the American people. Kennedy closed the folder and looked directly at the camera. Addressing the nation, the evidence shows a pattern of deception, financial opacity, misuse of classified information, and the political weaponization of intelligence for the purpose of maintaining a personal narrative and political power. This is not partisanship. This is the truth of Washington's institutional corruption. The gavel came down, sharp and final. The hearing was adjourned, but the reckoning had only begun.